Hi, everybody. This is a piece called The War in Israel Palestine by Alliance for Workers' Liberty. It was published just a few days ago. Today is October 12th. I'm reading it from the Fathom website, which I've used for a lot of essays that I've read on this channel. But it was originally posted on the Workers' Liberty website. So I'll read the little abstract that Fathom puts at the beginning, and then read the actual body of the article. The Alliance for Workers' Liberty, a UK radical socialist organization, posted this statement on the 8th of October 2023. Fathom is reposting it here with permission, not because we agree with every word, but because the Alliance for Workers' Liberty shows how a properly democratic socialist movement ought to react to the mass slaughter of civilians, quote, carried out by partisans of a violently reactionary ideology. Hostile not only to the Israeli military or state, but to Israelis as such, and specifically to Jews. End quote. Socialists who cannot see this worldview has nothing in common with our own egalitarian, democratic, humanist perspective. End quote. They write, quote, have utterly lost their political bearings, end quote. The editors thank the AWL for permission to reprint. Workersliberty.org is the website. At the time of writing, at least 300 people have been killed, with as many more injured, in a military incursion into Israeli towns by the Palestinian group Hamas, in conjunction with other groups such as Palestinian Islamic Jihad. The incursion followed a massive barrage of rockets fired at dawn, many against civilian targets. Hamas fighters have reportedly taken control of Israeli towns near the Gaza border with reports of indiscriminate shootings of civilians. Hamas has taken dozens of hostages, including both military personnel and civilians. Airstrikes and other actions by the Israeli military in response have killed over 200 Palestinians, with over 1,000 injured. Armed Israeli settlers have also attacked and killed Palestinians. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has promised, quote, a retaliatory war with a strength and scope that the enemy has never known, end quote. Previous Israeli wars on Gaza, often formally launched as, quote, retaliatory, following rocket attacks, have killed and wounded thousands of Palestinian civilians. Given the far-right character of Israel's government, Israel's military response is likely to be brutal, with thousands of Palestinian lives again at risk. Conditions of life in Gaza, already unbearable for many, will become worse. The Palestinians are an oppressed and colonized people. Revolutionary socialists, as anti-imperialist and consistent Democrats, support the right to resist oppression in pursuit of self-determination. It does not follow from that general principle that we must support, which in practice for UK socialists, and I would say this also applies for American socialists, currently means, quote, cheerlead via social media, end quote, any action undertaken in the name of, quote, resistance. The indiscriminate firing of rockets at civilian targets and the gunning down of civilians at random cannot possibly serve emancipatory and democratic ends. One video circulating on social media appears to show fighters parading the mangled corpse of an Israeli child, stripped almost naked, through the streets on a truck, while chanting, quote, God is great. These are actions carried out by partisans of a violently reactionary ideology, hostile not only to the Israeli military or state, but to Israelis as such, and specifically to Jews. Socialists who cannot see this worldview has nothing in common with our own egalitarian, democratic, humanist perspective, have utterly lost their political bearings. Hamas is not, in any case, merely an abstract expression of, quote, resistance. Hamas is a sophisticated paramilitary party with a developed political program and social project allied to several of Israel's regional imperialist rivals, including the clerical fascist regime of Iran. Means cannot be divorced from ends. Hamas uses brutal means because its ends, the imposition of a theocratic state, are brutal. Other Palestinians, women, LGBT plus people, atheists, and others have also been victims of that brutality. Some leftist commentators have celebrated Hamas's actions as an advance for, quote, democracy and human rights, end quote. But democracy and human rights cannot be advanced by a political force that explicitly opposes both. Some have argued that those who support Ukraine's right to militarily resist Russian invasion should support all Palestinian resistance on the same basis. Politics, by analogy, is always limited, but the relevant parallel here would be to a hypothetical scenario in which a far-right Ukrainian militia was attacking Russian towns, indiscriminately shooting at civilians and taking Russian civilian hostages, all on the basis of a political program that advocated the wholesale destruction of Russia. There is no such situation in Ukraine, but if there was, there would be no socialist or anti-imperialist principle that could justify any support for that. Whilst Hamas's incursion is not merely reactive, but rather part of the proactive pursuit of its own political aims, the situation cannot be understood outside of its context. The current Israeli regime is the most far-right government in the country's history. That government has an explicitly Jewish supremacist policy. Settler violence is at an all-time high, with armed settler gangs carrying out pogroms against Palestinians. Israel's military occupation of the West Bank has intensified its repression. The residents of Gaza continue to live in abject conditions with widespread poverty and lack of access to basic utilities. Those conditions are substantially a consequence of the blockade Israel enforces in alliance with Egypt. All of this cannot but have deepened a sense of desperation amongst the Palestinian people, which will have bolstered support for Hamas and PIJ, Palestinian Islamic Jihad. While Hamas, PIJ, and other paramilitary factions can inflict significant damage, they cannot militarily overwhelm Israel by themselves. They could only hope to do that as part of a regional, possibly global conflict in which Hezbollah, Iran, Syria, and other states also intervene against Israel. Such a conflict would be a bloodbath out of which no democratic outcome could emerge, and in which any prospect for distinct Palestinian self-determination would almost certainly be squeezed out by the regional imperialist aspirations of competing states. Israel has a right to defend itself. Or put it another way, Israeli civilians in places Hamas and PIJ have attacked or may yet attack have a right to security and to life. But the probable form of Israel's response, devastating air assaults on Gaza that kill many more civilians and further intensification of its military dictatorship over the West Bank, will stretch the definition of, quote, self-defense past breaking point. Much of what Israel has done and will now do in the name of, quote, self-defense is morally unjustifiable, disproportionate, and collective punishment. Israel's right to even proportionate self-defense is opposed by many on the far left, but those who oppose any action to protect civilians or to free civilian hostages are saying, in effect, that all Israeli civilians, including children, are legitimate targets. Indeed, some on the left do explicitly say exactly that. I want to read the link that they have here real quick. It's a tweet from the DSA, BDS, and Palestine Solidarity. DSA being Democratic Socialists of America. So this is a UK journal sharing this thing. The tweet says, one could and should very well argue that in a settler colonial context there are no such things as, quote, civilians. But disregarding that even, it's total folly to honestly compare settlers perpetrating pogroms to resistance groups deploying violence to liberate themselves. That's the tweet. This, quote, leftism is a grotesquely distorted character of the principles on which our politics should be based. Hamas's incursion was launched a week after a Qatar-brokered deal saw Israel reopen border crossings from Gaza to allow residents who work in Israel to cross. The deal itself followed demonstrations at the border to which Israel responded violently. In launching its incursion, Hamas has evidently decided to risk its own relations with Qatar, which may in any case have soured recently for other reasons. According to an article in the Israeli paper Haaretz, Hamas has also claimed that Qatar has also unilaterally reduced the amount it pays to Gaza in aid. Although according to a deal with Israel, it is meant to pay $10 million per month. For the last several, it has, Hamas says, paid just £3 million. I don't know. I don't know if that's the same. Sorry. Yeah. I don't know the conversion rate for pounds and dollars. It may also be the case that part of Hamas's aim is to snuff out prospects for a putative, quote, normalization deal between Saudi Arabia and Israel. Any such deal will be for the benefit of the Saudi and Israeli ruling classes rather than the Palestinian people. But if Hamas's alternative is to spark an all-out war in order to torpedo the deal, that will likely benefit the Palestinians even less. The attacks were clearly meticulously planned and must have taken weeks of preparation. That Israel, one of the most militarized states in the world and possessing the most developed security apparatus in the region, was caught unawares by the attacks is extraordinary and for now inexplicable. Israel tells its people that militarization, the occupation, and its periodic raids on Gaza are all necessary in order to protect Israeli Jews. That claim has been spectacularly undermined. For now, the situation is unstable and unpredictable. Hamas leaders have called for a wider uprising. Iran and Hezbollah have celebrated the attacks. The risk of a wider war is acute. Israeli military retaliation has begun and is ongoing. Further violence by paramilitary settler gangs is highly likely. Civilians on all sides will pay the price. Whatever happens in the immediate term will set back rather than advance prospects for social transformation that improves life for the Palestinians. The activity of the sizable Palestinian minority inside Israel will be an important factor in the developing situation. Although Palestinians in Israel face intensifying racism and discrimination, they have substantially more freedom to act than the occupied and blockaded Palestinians of the West Bank and Gaza. Significant mobilization, including strikes by Palestinians in Israel for democratic demands, could check the warmongering of the Israeli government, especially if such activity is able to unite in any way with continuing mobilization of the anti-occupation wing of Israel's democracy movement. There has never been a, quote, military solution to the political crisis in Israel-Palestine. Neither for Israel, whose military occupation will never extirpate Palestinians' aspirations for a national future in their historic homeland, nor for the Palestinians themselves. Progress is only possible on the basis of a framework that guarantees equal rights to both peoples, Israeli, Jewish, and Palestinian Arab, including an equal right to national self-determination via two independent states. However remote the prospect of such a framework is, and it is surely remote, It remains the only possible platform for moves towards the future unity and confederation that internationalists advocate. In a frightening and tragic context, fighters for real democracy and equality in Israel-Palestine will have to redouble their efforts of advocacy and mobilization. The best role we can play is to support them. In the original article, it has five bullet points that summarize the position, I suppose, of Alliance for Workers' Liberty as a whole, which, I don't know, to me at least seemed pretty sensible. Against Hamas's attacks, against the collective punishment of Gaza in response, against settler attacks in the West Bank, and the occupation for peace and workers' unity, for an independent Palestine alongside Israel, two states and equal rights.